ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week, our guest is our good friend Robbie Fraser, who is a game developer, works with Free Lives. You've made quite a few good games. One such is Genital Jousting, which is a great party game with a shockingly good narrative. That deals with all kinds of things about masculinity and aggression in some fashions and entitlement, and I really quite dig it. It was fun watching you work on it, and it was very fun playing the final product. Highly recommend it for those who want to have a good party night if you're finally planning one, or if you like good narratives. I highly give it a chance. And then recently you put out a game jam, which I quite enjoyed, called Anger Foot, which is a fast-paced first-person shooting and kicking game that has some phenomenal level design because it goes second to second, just like pretty high intense action. And that's like when I'm playing a first-person game, that's like kind of my thing. What I crave is I just want that like go mode. And it's got some great art, and I highly recommend it. And that's available on itch right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And recently you launched a Kickstarter, which is already successful, and I highly recommend everybody check it out, for a card game called DUSTBITERS, which I will best describe as a apocalyptic car convoy. I was going to say simulator game, card game. Where you have different cars on different cards, and they're in a row, and it's all about the different abilities on each car, positioning them and using the abilities to survive and take out your opponents at the same time. But I think you can probably do a better justification to the game, since it's yours.
Thank you for the warm welcome and the kind words about all those games. They're all very close to my heart. What would you like to talk about first?
Let's go DUSTBITERS, since it's exciting.
Okay.
I mean, they're all
perfect.
excited.
Thanks. Yeah, so DUSTBITERS is kind of like a 5-year-long collaboration between myself, Jan Willem Nijman, and Terry Velman, who are like, amazing game designers and artists. And yeah, it's been this like weird little card game side project that we've had since 2016, I believe. And yeah, it's out now on Kickstarter. We're about 2 weeks into the campaign. It's 100% funded already, so that's super amazing. But if you want a neat little card game about, like a card chase Mad Max style, you should go check it out. I'm gonna plug the Kickstarter right now. I think it'll still be going by the time this airs.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, you talk about like 5 years is a long time for, and I mean, I'm not throwing shade at myself, but 5 years is a long time to work on any game.
Yeah. For most people, 5 years is a long time.
But it seems particularly long. I don't know much about the world of physical card games, and we're only getting into like the production of, copies now. What was the what took so long with the building, or was it just a slow casual project, or what was the
right? Yeah, I think the length of the project is very much down to kind of like intentional pace we wanted to work at it.
Mm-hmm.
We're all like, working hard on games like as our day job, and DUSTBITERS was always kind of like a fun side project that was always on the back burner. It was something that JW and I would work on like once every 3 months. We'd like have a discussion, we'd like change some cards, we'd print a new deck, we'd do some play testing, and then like 6 months later we'd make some more progress. If one of us was finishing a game, it would just go into hold completely.
Mm-hmm.
So it was intentionally kind of a low stress project. And we're also not particularly accustomed to the tabletop games industry. So There was a lot to learn, especially in the last like year and a bit, where we were sort of looking for publishing partners or someone to help us with production of like a physical thing. We didn't necessarily want to start a board game company, so
Right.
um, there's just a bunch of stuff on that front as well, which is uh, taken a while to mature, but now we're in a super good place, and yeah, I'm really excited about the Kickstarter.
Right. Well, I mean, so I mean, I've seen you in busy times. Um, does it help? Do you find it helps you get through those crunchy times
Oh
on other
yeah.
games while you have a back burner slow burn project? Like what's
Absolutely. That's what's been like my favorite thing about DustBiters is that it was always like it doesn't matter how like stressful or like badly going my like current project was. It was nice to always just like have something good in the background that was like, well, at least I have this.
hmm
Um, yeah, it's definitely something that's like uh, it's nice to have something in the background that's like exciting but not stressful, you know?
right, right,
Um, and it always felt like something that was coming together really well, so it was nice to have that in the back pocket. And also it was nice to have something that was different to like a video game, right? Like the design process, everything was like very different. Like so utilizing a lot of the same skills, but not kind of like stressing me out in the same way. Uh,
right. I mean, going through my first two games, I was very much in the mindset of like have to give 100% attention and focus exclusively to this. Um, but do you see yourself carrying multiple projects? I mean, have you other than Dust Spiders, have you carried multiple projects simultaneously? Do you enjoy that generally, and is it something that you think you want to keep doing?
um, I don't know. That's a tricky one. I'm pretty bad at kind of juggling multiple things and context switching. Um, I'm quite lucky in my role, particularly at Free Lives, being like quite specialized, and I get to really focus on like the core of my job. Um, so I'm not sure I want to do more than one project at a time. But if I do, I would like it to be something like Dust Spiders, which is like in a bit of a different field, a bit of a different pace, less pressure. Like Dust Spiders never had any deadline pressure,
Mm-hmm.
um, which makes it's not about spinning plates, right? It's like the main project always like took preference, which made Dust Spider super easy to work on because we only worked on it when we had time and we had like space available.
Right, right, right. I'm actually hearing a lot of parallels here between how you were working on Dust Spiders and what I heard from Ken Young working on Grindstone. It was a project that he had for like 5, 6 years in the back burner, working on very casually. But one thing I'm curious about. So then, what if there's no deadline pressure? What is it that like ultimately makes now the time to launch the Kickstarter and finish it? Where where does that clicky click happen?
Right. I think it got to the point where the game was done, right? Like Dust Spiders is like a very focused design. It's not the kind of game where you can keep adding things forever until you eventually decide to just stop and call it finished.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was more a case of like we removed everything we could. We knew it was good. We had our final deck. We'd iterated on like the card text and the rules and everything, and it was basically finished. And we just wanted to get it out there. So, we started looking for people who could help us produce it, and then eventually found I Am 8-Bit, who are kind of helping us with the production side and PR and various things like that. Shipping, fulfillment, all the kind of
Mm-hmm.
board game business things that we don't want to do. Um, yeah, and then I guess we just decided to sort of set a date for the Kickstarter, and then at that point, obviously there was deadline pressure, so it has been more work, and it it sort of stopped being the like easygoing background project. But still, we were pretty prepared for that, and we've had a lot of help, and JW and Terry have been amazing. So it's been pretty smooth sailing, even though once you put together a timeline for a Kickstarter, you kind of have to
Right.
get your ducks in a row.
Have you ever? I don't think I've talked to a dev who's done a Kickstarter project yet. But have you worked with Kickstarter before? Is it a platform you're comfortable with already, or are you learning?
So I have actually been involved in running a Kickstarter once before, which was a miserable failure. This was some years ago when I was working for another studio called Tasty Poison Games, and we basically had no money. We were funded by like a mobile game publisher, and we had like an ongoing project, and they decided they were going to pull funding, but they would pay us to put together a Kickstarter, and then if the Kickstarter was successful, they would sort of continue funding the project, right? So they were like,
the best of circumstances.
Yeah. So that was like a last minute 1 month. We had no idea what we were doing. We like
Right.
put together a vertical slice, put it on Kickstarter. Yeah, and it was not funded. So and shortly after, the studio kind of, I don't want to say closed, but more like dissipated, right? Where people started working at other places because there was no money.
Right.
It wasn't like a, the studio's closed now. Thanks everyone. It's like we're trying to find more funding, etc. But in the meantime, obviously we have to pay bills and things. So, yeah.
And so I assume you're saying that there's obviously a marked difference between what the success of these two. But what were the important lessons, I guess, that you learned in the first one? Anything that you've applied here, or has it just been completely different?
Not really, to be honest. I also think that kind of the video game and tabletop game are quite different in the Kickstarter space. Like I think there's quite a well-trodden path for tabletop games on Kickstarter. Like it is a common way to launch any kind of tabletop game is to do a Kickstarter, and there's lots of kind of knowledge out there, and I think there's just a lot less risk involved. Like you usually do it once you already have a finished design. It's kind of just like a fancy pre-ordering system to fund your first pre-run or like print run, right? So you don't end up like printing 1,000 copies of a game that nobody wants.
Right.
We just weren't prepared when I did the Kickstarter with Tasty Poison.
It
was a last minute thing.
1 month to make
we
a
had
vertical
no
slice
like PR plan. We had nothing.
That's not gonna.
We threw together a page and like hoped for the best, basically.
Right. So I'm curious then, like, what do you think? Why do you think there are so many more successful board game Kickstarters than video game Kickstarters? Is it that risk factor of like video game might not get finished, board game just needs printing, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I think it's also like video games have to charge a lot of money, right? Like it's really expensive to make a video game. And so if you have a game that's still like 3 years away from being finished, like you have to set like a really high funding target.
Right.
Or you have to set a funding target that like completely doesn't cover your costs, which obviously isn't recommended. I also think there's like a difference in the kind of people who back Kickstarters. I think board games have a lot of kind of collectorism. I don't know if that's like a word or not, but I think there's like a tendency for people who buy board games to just want to buy physical things. So I think that people buy board games for their collection, and in that way, some of the things that you get out of a Kickstarter, like little merch items and fancy backer rewards and kind of exclusive trinkets and things, like fit into that more than with like a video game where like your average consumer just wants to play the game.
I'm very excited about my sticker.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, uh, we need to hit the air freshener stretch goal as well. Um, People are sleeping on the air freshener, but it's pretty good.
The what so then I mean I've still seen there's still it's pretty populated on the Kickstarter landscape. What do you think were the combination of factors apart from it being a cool game that led to such a quick success for the project?
Um, so there's a few things. First of all, I think me and JW and Terry have like a good track record games wise and a
Mm-hmm.
fairly significant reach um, within the like sort of indie developer community. And I think we got about 25% of our backers so far are like from Twitter, basically.
Right.
So, just having an existing audience for our video games helped. Um, and also that provided like a bit of a press angle. We've been trying to milk the sort of like star indie lineup makes
Right.
card game angle, just to give some people something to write about.
Right.
That helps. We were lucky enough to get Tim Schafer to be in our Kickstarter video, so he's another kind of
Mm-hmm.
big name, another like press talking point,
I'm not gonna
to
lie,
like.
I didn't even actually watch the video. I just clicked buy immediately. I had no idea.
Okay, yeah. So apparently that doesn't even help. Yeah, so those kind of things. We partnered with Tinsley PR, who are a well-known like PR company in the indie game space, and so we did kind of the right amount of planning and things like that, right? We had kind of a good PR plan. We sent out early copies to press and reviewers. We sort of had like a decent press angle, and I think also another big thing is just the theme and the format of the game is really strong. Um, I feel like, I mean, this is true of any product you're trying to sell, but I think it has to be something that's appealing and that people want. Um, and I think we did a pretty good job on that front.
Right. So I mean, I could speak to it, but I mean, I want to, I guess, hear from you. But what do you think the strengths of the game are? Why do you think? Why do I like it? Why did I enjoy playing it as a designer? What's going on? Like, why is it fun?
Right.
How did
So
it become fun?
there's a few things that I think are important. So the first thing is kind of the fantasy of it, right? And in particular, it's the way that the gameplay sort of mimics the fantasy so well, right? Like when you use the ramp truck to like launch a car to the front of the convoy, you can kind of like imagine that happening as like a scene in like Mad Max, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the bomb truck, okay, which isn't in the game anymore, explodes and destroys two cars, it like like every turn in the game feels like something happening in like a movie car chase, which I think is really a strong point. Um, the other strong point is the format of the game. It's very simple. It's 21 cards. You can learn it in like 2 minutes. It's super uncomplicated. You can carry it around in your pocket. Um, so it's very kind of casual in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, it's sort of the opposite of those like 3 hour board game marathons where the first hour is
Right.
like just explaining the rules and doing like a test run to understand even the like win condition. It's the kind of thing where you play for 10 minutes and then you play again because you had a good time, or you stop playing. Um, but it's very like low pressure to play. So I think that appeals to certainly like a certain number of people. And then the third thing is I think there's interesting gameplay, right? Like there's still strategical depth in terms of um, the different cool things you can do in a turn. It's like, oh, I could use the mind manipulator to control this card to do that, or there's it's simple to understand how the rules work, but
Right.
because each card affects the convoy differently, and sort of like each card has its own rules in a way. There's a lot of combinations of things that can happen in a turn. So, um, it's kind of interesting exploring that like potential space as a player, like figuring out like the potential ways you could like change the board state in one turn.
Right. You touched on something really fun there with the keeping the fantasy through the mechanics. Now, I mean, I've played a fair number of I guess small deck card games before, and I'm a big Magic the Gathering player. But I've often felt like, particularly with Magic, even though sometimes you can get that fantasy theming through the mechanics. At the end of the day, especially when you start building your own deck, it just becomes like just mechanics, and that fantasy interplay goes away. I know I stopped seeing the knight wearing the cool sword or whatever, and it becomes like a +2/+2 and this and it sort of slowly hits this abstraction. What is it in Dustbiters that allows that fantasy to stay active at all times, and it doesn't just
Right.
like or as a designer, do you now just see a mechanical side?
So I think there's a point in any game where if you take it seriously enough, like strategically, you'll start to see that, right? Like there are sort of high level Dustbiters players who I've played with who are like counting cards and calculating potential like card destruction probabilities, and I don't know like exactly what's going on, but there's definitely like if you're playing something explicitly to win and you're quite serious about it, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's going to happen. I think the casual nature of the game means that like most people are just having a good time and haven't played the game enough times or aren't like as serious about it. I also think a small thing that helps is just um, the nature of the turn structure. So the way the turns work in Dustbiters is you have 3 actions, and you have a number of different ways to spend those 3 actions in your turn. You can like place a new car at the front of the convoy. You can draw a card into your hand. You can drive one of your cars forwards or backwards, or you can use one of the like varying car powers. Um, but what that ends up doing is that when someone's playing the game, they end up kind of like narrating like a small. I keep referencing like a scene from a car chase movie.
Mm-hmm.
But so you end up, in order to kind of let the other player know what you're doing, you almost end up describing like a little scene where you say, okay, I move the ramp truck 1 space forward, then I use Spiky to destroy the crusher, and then for my final action I draw, it almost has like a little kind of dramatic role play to it,
Right.
as you like narrate what you're spending your actions on, I guess, which makes it feel more like those things are happening in the world, right?
So a lot of that sounds like it just comes down to like the nomenclature of the abilities and the cards themselves, which is I guess a significant part of the success of the design. Like if you force the player to use words that have fantasy application, then I guess they automatically have to embrace the fantasy. Like if you can't just talk about 1/1 counters and you know.
Yeah, I think it's also that the sort of verbs of the game are like real world verbs. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I build a new car at the front. I drive, you know, my garbage collector 1 space forward, right? Where it's not like I deal 2 damage points to your health pool, which is like
Right.
very abstract,
Right. 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 That is very interesting, and I think that's something that you can only be done with a small focused themed card game like this, because if you're going for a larger CCG TCG kind of system, everything has to be more generic, and thus 2 steps further away from that fantasy. Tap and discard and
Yeah.
exile and
I think it's also sort of um yeah, just keeping the mechanics rooted in kind of like a real world space, right? Where there's no other resources. There's no, we had some explicit rules that we didn't want like hand manipulation, for example, because it doesn't really fit the fantasy of the game. Like, it doesn't make sense in the context of like a car chase to be like, I look at your hand,
Right. I force you to discard. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. Well, right. So, I mean, there's a prevailing sort of, I won't call it an issue with a lot of card games I play, but a thing that happens where there is a best choice, and the sort of like freedom and creativity of the game gets kind of stripped out when there's like very clear optimal ways to play. Is that something at all you considered through design? Was there anything that like when there's an overpowered strategy, or you given what you have, like this is the optimal, what do they call it, perfect games, where you have all the information available and there is an optimal choice versus this is what I think is going to be good?
That's a super common thing in game design in general, is if there's kind of an optimal strategy, like players will optimize the fun out of their own experience, right?
I'm going to bunny hop across the map because it's 10%
or
faster.
it's like this one weapon is like more optimal, so I'm going to use this weapon instead of the other 10 like super fun weapons, and the game's going to feel like really repetitive and boring, but I'm not going to recognize that I'm spoiling my own fun, right? And like it's on the game designer to remove that optimal strategy, and force the player to have fun as much as possible. So yeah, exactly. So there were a lot of things that we removed from the game that were like fun in some situations, but not fun in other situations, or like fun and exciting and that like we really liked, but were just too optimal. And so we really kind of optimized the game for like the average quality of game, right? If that makes sense. We tried to remove things that would be like fun, like really fun once in every 3 games, but kind of bad the other 2 games, right? We really tried to optimize the deck until it was a point where it was like every game was good and there wasn't always an optimal choice. And and there's also a limit to how far you can go with that, right? Like if players really start to understand the game from a strategic level, there's always going to be like a theoretically optimal choice for every turn, I guess. But it's not that kind of game, right? Like we're not aiming to have like big DUSTBITERS tournaments.
Right.
It's the kind of thing you like bring in your pocket to a party and like can teach to someone who's never played in like 1 minute. So it's not really an issue.
Right. Which is, I think, how I ended up playing it the first time. Or, I mean, when it wasn't, I don't think it was a party, but it was there in your pocket, and we just played, and it was quick and easy to pick up. And is that how you found the things to remove and the things to change? Was that your playtesting period for 5 years of just?
Yeah, pretty much. So one of the nice things about working on a card game versus working on a video game is it's like incredibly fast to iterate on design. It's like, especially early on, it's so easy to just like scratch out a number and like write a different number and just play again. Or it's like, or like, make a completely new card in like 10 seconds by writing words on a piece of paper and playing again. Whereas like in a video game, it's like that could take a week to make that change, or a month. Right. So we did a lot of iteration, and so we also, like, now that you can buy the game on Kickstarter, we've gotten quite a few complaints of people saying like, I don't know, it's like 20 euros, but there's only 21 cards, and there's I guess people like don't see that as value for money, which is like the new.
I want more paper.
It's the card game equivalent of like, this game is only like 90 minutes, but right. I played paid $10 for it. My like dollar to minute ratio needs to be much higher. But yeah, so we really removed as many cards as we possibly could. Every time we had a card that was like kind of like, this card is fun sometimes, but other times it's not fun, or in the right situation it's too strong, we'd just be like, if we remove it, the deck gets smaller and the games get shorter. And so we really tried to design as like subtractively as possible and like get the kind of most focused experience we could.
If you had to guess, how many cards did you throw away?
I mean, we must have tried more than 100 cards, I'm sure.
Right.
So there's 21 in the deck now, but also it's like, it's incredibly cheap to just try a card idea, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that sounds like a lot, but also it takes like,
Right.
you can try
some
like 5 new card ideas that you wrote in like 1 minute.
An hour. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. That's really cool, though. Now I know nothing about how the game started. Where did you guys? What made you start working on Dustbiters, and where did the idea come from, and all that?
Right. So I went on a road trip with JW, from my parents' house in Johannesburg up into Mozambique. And we originally wanted to go to Namibia, and then it was too far to drive. We like thought about, flying to Cape Town and then driving up from there, and we're like, oh, let's just go to Mozambique. So we went on this road trip, and we didn't take any electronics. And I guess like if game designers go on a trip without electronics, they design card games instead. So there's a few more origin story tidbits. So this is also in 2016, when shortly after I was at Stugan, which is this like amazing games accelerator program that happens in the Swedish forests. And there I was introduced to a game called Time Barons by my good friend Armel. And we absolutely adored it, and we ended up like streaming like a weird like knockout tournament on Twitch, and we had like so much fun with this game, Time Barons. And so I emailed John Perry, who's the designer of Time Barons, and said, I'm going on this road trip. Could you send me a print and play copy of Time Barons? Because like I want to play it with my friends. And he was gracious enough to send that over, and we printed it out, and we had this like super budget like print and play copy of Time Barons with like stolen tokens from like Checkers or something. And so JW and I played that a lot, and that kind of inspired the 3 actions per turn mechanic. So we had sort of we had like a basic turn structure kind of ready to go, borrowed from Time Barons. And the other thing is that Terry Vellman had reached out to JW earlier in the year and basically just said, if you ever want to collaborate on a card game, I would love to do art. And so there was like, I think in the back of JW's mind, there was like this perfect collaboration waiting to happen, and like he was thinking about card games. Yeah, and then one night we just like made the first version. The very first version was like much more complicated. There was like terrain tiles that you would like flip over, where it's like the convoy is driving over mountains now.
Right.
But we quickly just stripped out everything that wasn't cars. Like I think we really liked the elegance of just like there's only cars, no tokens, no score sheets, no like math, no victory points, just cars. I also distinctly remember that very first night when we made the first version in Mozambique. We were playing on a table that had like slats with like big gaps between them, and if you know how Dustbiters works, you know that like new cards are always placed at the front of the convoy, and at the end of each turn, the dust storm destroys the car at the back of the convoy, so you constantly end up shifting the whole thing. And I remember individually having to like move each card one space over the gap in the slats. So yeah, that's basically the origin story. We started making it on a road trip, and then we kind of kept making it, you know,
thereafter.
a couple days work here and there over the next like 4 years or something, you know.
Right. That's really interesting. What was there a moment in that road trip prototype when you kind of felt it click? What was there, the introduction or a removal of a mechanic or something? What was the kind of moment where it clicked, or did that happen later?
No, I think that was probably on that first night when we were just like, we should remove everything except cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the game should just be like a car is a card. There are no duplicates. Everyone is unique. There's nothing else. It's just a convoy of cars. And like I think we really liked the simplicity and the elegance of that. And then from there on out, it was just about refining the rule set and the actual card text around that.
Right. Now, I understand how you collaborate on a digital game remotely, but how do you collaborate on a card game remotely? That seems a lot more difficult.
Yeah, so a lot of it wasn't. We didn't do that much remote work. So um, both JW and I were lucky enough that at the time we were doing a lot of traveling for, JW was effectively nomadic and homeless, and I was also like lucky enough to be able to travel to various games events and things. And JW came and stayed here in Cape Town for a couple months. I visited him in the Netherlands once, and then there were a couple of events like Amaze Berlin, GDC one year where we were able to meet up, and then we'd like, before some kind of event like that, we'd gather all our playtesting feedback, we'd make some decisions, we'd like refine some cards, and then we'd print a new deck or hand draw a new deck in a lot of cases, and then we'd play test with as many friends as we could at like, if it was a maze, we'd get as many game developers as we could to play the game, and then we'd record feedback, and then over the coming months we'd kind of like chat about it on Slack, update the spreadsheet that had all the card text in, like make a new iteration, and then nothing would happen for 6 months until one of us was like going to another event or doing something, or we could be together or whatever, and then we'd do a bit more work. So yeah, it was very sporadic.
Yeah, so then it sounds like it was absolutely tried and tested in the partiest of situations, rather than designated. Let me focus and design good card game, which is I guess it lends itself to a certain style of design and kind of comes through in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd have long discussions like afterwards about like, is this card good? Is this card bad? How, what exactly should the card text be? Should we remove this rule? Should we add this rule? But yeah, it definitely went through periods where we were pretty much just play testing in like fun situations and just recording as much like feedback and thoughts as we could.
Right.
We also got good feedback from like other game designer friends we knew. We sent out print and play versions and asked people to help us test and give their thoughts. So that helped a lot as well.
Now, I guess I'll be remiss if we didn't start also talking. I want to talk a little bit about Anger Foot because I am
Cool.
I'm excited for its developments. So you did that for Ludendari, right? If I'm not mistaken, or was it it was a game jam?
Yeah. So it's my current digital project, I guess. So yeah, we did it originally right at the end of last year for 7-day FPS.
Oh, 7 days. Gotcha.
Yeah, we went to a farm and spent a week making like a silly little like shooty game,
Mm-hmm.
and it was immediately fun and felt like we were onto something.
I guess
And
who is we?
so the project is myself, Luke Walters, who's the artist, and Jason Sutherland, who's the sound designer. And recently we just had another programmer, Jem Smith, also join the team. So it's a free lives project. We're all free livers, and yeah, we did a little free lives getaway to work on 7-day FPS games, and yeah, this came out of it, and it was kind of at the time I was still working on my city builder game called Second Earth, and this project was just seemed more exciting and crucially more finishable. So after we made the jam version, we're like, we just want to work on this more. Yeah, and that's still true today. I'm having a blast working on it. It's coming together really nicely. Yeah, it's super fun to work on. So
Right.
very happy with it.
Now I'll say, when you've been working on a project for like Second Earth for a while, anything new seems exciting. But what was it in particular about Angerfoot that got you going?
So I feel like when you do a game jam, there's kind of this ideal version of a game jam that like every designer has in their mind, where you like make something and it's just super fun from like hour one, and then you just improve it until the end of the jam, right? And that's kind of like the like unicorn you're looking for when you do a game jam. Is like, I want something where just like it immediately feels good. It's not like maybe in like a few more days this will come together and be something playable. It's like Angerfoot was just had that magic from the get-go of like being super fun to just interact with and just play and have like that fun tight loop, and it just being something that already felt really fun and we could just add content to. Like it just felt simple and like easy to make and like fun to work on. That it was just, I don't know. It's hard to describe, but it seemed kind of obvious.
Right. Right. So, for 7-day FPS, I don't know much about the jam, but I assume it is make a FPS in 7 days.
Yeah, it's. I think that's how it started. I think now it is sort of. It's still called 7-day FPS, and I think all the games are first person, but it's a jam that prides itself on not having any rules.
Right.
Right. So
yeah,
you can do whatever you like, basically.
Right. So going into the jam, what was the process for finding that, first couple hours successful, this is fun minute, right? Like, I mean, it's pretty easy to jump in with first person shooting is like inherently almost always fun, but like what made you certain that this was fun beyond that?
Yeah. So I guess we really wanted to kind of have like that John Wick power fantasy feeling, right? So I think also Luke and I, weirdly enough, drew a lot of inspiration from SWAT 4. I don't know if you've ever played SWAT 4.
No.
Okay.
Teach
Anyway, it's an incredibly slow tactical shooter, basically the opposite of Angerfoot, but it has these moments where you sort of set up a door breach and you would play it co-op, where like one player would place a charge on the door, the other player would like get ready with a stun grenade, and then you'd like breach and like clear a room like really quickly, like throw in flashbangs and come in shouting, hands up. And it was incredibly satisfying. And we wanted that kind of like busting through a door feeling. Yeah, and then we just went from there, and we realized very quickly that like short, repetitive levels where enemies are always in the same place, and you have that kind of loop of learning how to beat each room, and that fast kind of respawn, try again, and then when you finish the level, you did it so efficiently, you feel like a total badass, right? Because the game is difficult and kind of demands you to like hit your shots and move quickly.
On a
I don't know if that answers your question at all.
right, no, it does. The on a technical note, I'm always curious. Different developers have different processes for this. What was your method for getting that quick reload? Because it's almost instantaneous, right? Like avoiding the loading of a level and repositioning everything and cleaning up all the blood splatters and everything. Well, how did you manage that so quickly?
Right. So a lot of that is just Unity, I guess. And in a lot of ways we are limited by the engine. Um, so, but it's also there's a fair amount of like pre-baking that goes into certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, you know, there's some like pre-calculations that the AI do and things like that we do actually at build time, instead of when the scene first starts, just to like save a couple milliseconds here and there so that you do have that fast kind of respawn. But yeah, it's something we just have to make sure we're optimizing for where we can and not do anything that's gonna increase the amount of time it takes to reload the scene, basically.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's it's a very simple game. It is a lot of fun, but it is very simple. Do you ever find yourself trying to complicate it and pulling back? Because I have that problem all the time where it's like I've got something good and it's nice and easy and simple, but um, I feel this like there's the designer developer in me is like no, I must add new thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely like a classic pitfall is to just make things too complicated, right? And like add cool ideas until there's like too many cool ideas. Yeah, I think it's important. And like I think DustBiters is a great example of this, to kind of like remove things that are like a bit unnecessary, right? Like I think
Mm-hmm.
cutting is like an important game design skill that game designers often don't think about as like, like game designers get together and they're like, what are we going to add today? Instead of like,
Right.
what can we remove today to make this more streamlined? So I think that's important. I also think in the case of Angerfoot, making something simple is very much a reaction to Second Earth, which is this like incredibly complicated like city builder defense game. It's very systems heavy, you know, um, very like technically challenging to like work on. And I was definitely at a point where it's like, let's make something like the simpler and the stupider the better, and just like focus on something that's like fun from day one and doesn't have like a lot of hard problems to solve. So yeah.
Right. So I mean, the art is very Luke. um, it is it screams his style, but it does also sit in this like very free livesy style. I mean, that inevitably happens. I think when you have only a handful of people working in a company, and it sort of tends to be quite like not homogenous is a bad word for it. Repetitions in theme and style. What was the like? Was it just Luke, go do your thing? Was there much of a group discussion on it? How did it come to be?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with all aspects of the game, it's stuff we talk about, it's stuff you have those discussions and those like kind of water cooler moments where you're like, oh, this is awesome, this is awesome. But yeah, in terms of art style, it is mainly uh, like Luke's baby, and he's done an amazing job. He's
Mm-hmm.
an amazing artist, and um, I think just from early on, we kind of had an idea of what we wanted, kind of this like nightclub, dingy apartment, fever dream vibe, and then we just started working from there. Um, yeah, and a lot of it is kind of the Free Live style. I mean, I think Free Lives makes a lot of like weird and diverse games, and
Hmm.
not all of them are that weird. Like Terra Nil is like one of our new projects that's like very wholesome and very like not Free Livesy in a lot of ways.
Right.
But I think outside of that, like the core kind of thread in all the Free Lives projects is that they're extremely over the top in some way. We like to make things that are ridiculous. And yeah, Anger Foot is definitely like no exception to that. We just wanted to make something that was kind of stupid and silly, and that's just it's fun to tell jokes and like and not take your work too seriously.
Right. Yes,
Um,
I agree. Um,
so yeah, we like making those kind of games.
so where do you see the game going from here? Um,
Right. So in the last like I don't know 8 months or so since the original Jam version, we've released a few sizable updates on itch. Where we I don't want to promise anything, but we're working towards some kind of Steam launch at some point in the
mhm.
future. Once we've solved some of the bigger questions and the game is ready. But I think we want to keep it fairly straightforward. We don't want to make it too big. We don't want to make it too complicated. We want to, it's the kind of game that's like pretty intense to play. So we don't want it to overstay its welcome. Um, and yeah, I just want to make something that like is fun and silly and short and that people will love. That's kind of where I'm going with it.
Right, right, right. Um, do you think there's like it's a bit with the rise of the like retro like Quake style first person shooter, right? There's been a
Right.
lot
The
of
boomer
yeah,
shooters.
the boomer shooters. There's so many of them now, and they're like I feel like the I've looked at a couple of these games and being completely unable to tell them apart. Like I mistake them sometimes because they seem so similar. Um, Obviously, this has a very distinct visual style, but how do you have any worries about like releasing a first person shooter into such a saturated market? I mean, all of indie games is saturated at this point, but do you have any concerns there?
Not particularly. I do think that we're not trying to make like a boomer shooter or a retro
Yeah.
shooter, right? Like a lot of those games kind of rely on nostalgia, um, rather than like good game design. I feel.
Hmm.
I feel like there's a few examples of games that are like, hey, remember your childhood? This game looks similar, but like game design has progressed a long way since then, and you won't have as much fun as you would have when you were 8 years old because you were eight, and everything was amazing. Um, so yeah, I have no desire to appeal to nostalgia, um,
Right, and the game
and
absolutely doesn't. Like, I'm just
yeah. Um, I also think there's like, okay, I'm ranting a little bit now, but I think there's like a bit of a trap where that aesthetic people do it sometimes because it's easy.
mm,
It's almost like the new like indie low poly aesthetic.
mm,
It's like it looks like a PS1 game or whatever, or it's like 3D but with sprites, like Doom. And I think like most indies by necessity have to choose cheap art styles, and I think that's partially one of the reasons you see so many kind of like retro looking games and why they look so similar sometimes is because like it's expensive to do like a new art style or something different artistically. Um,
right. Um, but I think you do kind of achieve that with Angerfoot. It doesn't look like well, like is it shaders at play? What is giving it the is the lighting?
yeah, so Luke's done a lot of like great work on the shaders, and I think the key thing that sort of sets Angerfoot's art style apart is it has kind of this cell shaded, like banded lighting effect, but it's not like super stepped. There's some softness in there, right? So it's kind of like bands and natural fall off together. I don't know if that makes sense, but it has kind of like a unique lighting style. Yeah, and it's also just, Luke is a good artist with good tastes, and he's taken good influences in, and I think there's kind of like a lot of character in the character designs and things like that, and also just a lot of iteration on like the level of detail of things and the color palettes and sort of like the atmosphere of the game. And yeah, and it's an evolving process as well. We're still like figuring out a lot of this stuff, and if I think about each time we release a new build of the game, I like can't look at the old build anymore. I'm like, oh
Right.
no, how did I ever think this was good? You know. Um,
That's a good sign.
but yeah,
That's forward progress.
yeah, no, I'm very happy with how it's turning out, and yeah, we should really get Luke on this show sometime
I
to
know.
speak about the art style because he would do a much better job than me.
Yeah. Well, then let's talk about because the one thing I gameplay wise I appreciated was the level design. I thought I think I've only played the original version, so the version you hate the most.
Right.
But um it just felt really really well paced. So I'm curious what your process in building the levels was like, and what how it's changed, I guess, over since. I mean, I assume it's kept the same fast pacedness and the keeping the excitement of the breach every time, but
Yeah, so I've definitely been learning a lot about level design from this game, and I think a game like this kind of lives and dies by its level design. And designers, especially like programmer designers, often sort of neglect this kind of thing, where they'll like spend 90% of their time like working on systems and then like only 10% of the time working on content. But iterating on the levels is like super important for this kind of game. And yeah, I guess there's just a few things that we figured out were like important for the design of the levels. One of which is the length, right? The levels are incredibly short. Um, and I think if you're going to have a game where you're supposed to die a bunch of times and replay every level, like, our longest level is like a minute, maybe a minute and a half, something like that. We don't want to go over that because it kind of breaks. There's a point where it's not fun to replay anymore, right? And where it's too much to learn, right? Another key part of the design of the game is that you learn something every time you fail, right? So we try to keep things consistent so that if you get like cheaply shot by someone you didn't know was there, the next time you play, you'll know that enemy is going to be there, and they aren't going to like randomly spawn on the other side of the room instead. So there is kind of like a fun repetition that we're going for with short levels. And yeah, outside of that, it's just kind of like trying to design fun encounters in like quite a limited space, I guess.
I mean, I always find this sort of level designing interesting because, I mean, like like the card game problem, there is a perfect answer to how you play the level, right? And as a designer, you kind of need to. Or at least I find when I play shooters of this type, I memorize where everybody's going to be over time, and like finishing that first quarter of the level becomes like breathing. It's so guaranteed because I
Yeah.
know, right? So what is your process of like, do you just start like sprinkling in enemies, or do you think about like where you want the player to turn and how what the path you
Uh,
want them to take, or
So if I'm starting a new level, I often have some kind of like theme or like core idea that's like, let's try this. So in a lot of cases, it'll be introducing something new, right? So if we have a new enemy design or a new weapon, or a new mechanic or something, or even just like a new sort of like environmental thing that the player would have been. It's kind of like, what's the best way I can? This is like kind of classic game design, but it's like, what is the best way I can introduce this, right? So it's like, how do I teach this thing, right? You know, like if we have an exploding barrel for the first time the player's ever seen one, and you know the way they work is if you kick them, they fly against a wall and explode. Like, kind of the obvious thing to do is to put like a barrel right in front of the player prime to be kicked into someone, you know,
right?
to teach them that that's how they work. So there's a lot of like teaching that goes, and then like if you're not trying to teach something with a specific level, there's like small themes where I'm like, you know, what if this level was like more long corridors? You know, like what if this level was like more wide open spaces? You know, what if this level there was just a section where you don't get any ammo for a while. So I kind of like start with just an idea like that and then design around it. But honestly, with Angerfoot, it's like pretty simple. Like it's even the worst levels are pretty fun, and with playtesting, you kind of learn to remove the cheap deaths, and you know shorten things that are too long, and just you know remove enemies when the levels are too hard. You know, um,
Yeah. Do you find that when you're going through that process of teaching mechanics and teaching things, I think this is a question I asked last week actually, or the week before, but do you find that the levels start to design themselves in a bit of a way? Like there's a way it kind of has to be done.
yeah, so I do think that like you know the example I gave with like teaching the barrel is like that's almost obvious, right? It's like
hmm
you want to teach a player that they can kick a barrel, you just put a barrel in the most obvious place right in front of them, and you put something that like they would almost have to go out of their way to not kick the barrel at that point. Um, you know, and so that lesson kind of designs itself, and there are a lot of things like that, where the teaching happens first, and then I kind of go from there, right? Where it's like, okay, so there's this level you learn how to use a barrel, so like the rest of the level I'm just gonna make like kind of barrel focus, and I'm gonna think about the kind of things you can do with a barrel, and you know put more barrels in this level than there will probably be anywhere else in the game, and it can be the barrel level. So I also think that in general in game design, like one soft content is like pretty good.
Mm.
So like if you have a level that has like one gimmick, it's probably going to be like more memorable than your other levels, and it's worth like whatever work it takes to make that happen, even if it's you only use it for like a 1 minute level, you know. So yeah, I like to try and design levels with once-off gimmicks or ideas as well if we can.
Outside of game design, have you ever had a job as a teacher or a coach of any sort?
Um, I've I've uh I've coached climbing, like rock climbing before.
Right.
Um, just to students when I was also a student. Um, I don't know if that qualifies. So I don't know. I think I would be okay as like a teacher, but I have like no desire to be one, so I'll never know.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
it's one of those weird like because you're right. Like so much of good game design is effectively teaching the player, and I often wonder about the skill overlap in people who do it really well. Um,
yeah, I think there's like a there's almost uh, different skill sets and kind of like designing a lesson versus like
right,
delivering a
right.
lesson. I
Yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
I'd be like pretty good at like designing a lesson. I'm not sure I'd be like good at dealing with people.
Uh,
um, But yeah, I think like being able to teach is like super important for game design. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of kind of psychology and other sort of overlapping fields that are, useful for game designers.
Did you develop that skill just by doing game design itself, or is there anything more that you practiced teaching?
Mm, I don't think so. I mean, I don't even know if I'm like good, right? So before I'd be like, oh yeah, the way I learned the skill is like,
Right.
you know, uh, it is something that I guess like the more you practice it, the better you'll get. Like that's the only sort of
Mm-hmm.
advice I can give. And I think uh, practicing game design is super important for game designers, and I think it's a thing that like not a lot of game designers do. I think a lot of game designers think that making games is the same as practicing game design, um, but it's not. Like I think you can, you know, spend a year making a game without doing any actual game design on it. Just
Right.
like, just implementing things that are like genre conventions, or that you think it's like, oh, this is a shooter, so there must be this, or
So
like
then, how do I
just getting
practice game
lost in
design?
the world of like implementing things, but not
Mm-hmm.
like thinking critically about like the player experience
Right.
and like
That's literally what I've been doing all year. But it's kind of essential. We haven't really gotten to the part of game design yet. But how do you if I'm stuck in a period right now where I'm doing very like hyper technical stuff that is zero care about the player, do server and frame rate issues and these kinds of things. But I still want to actively participate in the practice of game design. How do you practice game design other than doing game levels and such?
so I mean it just comes down to like thinking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um something that helps me a lot, I guess, is just being around other game designers. Like even if I'm not currently doing game design on my own project, just like working at Free Lives, like the kind of discussions we have about game design, or for other projects or just games that people have been playing, someone will have an issue with the game they played, and then we'll talk about how we could have designed it better, um, totally without any of the required information. Um, but yeah, so I think that kind of stuff is good. Just being kind of like around other game designers and talking about game design is useful. I think doing game jams or like working on other games where you are designing things is obviously like, it's practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not doing practice, you're not practicing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I would be, I don't know exactly what your current situation is, but I would be very worried about doing too much like technical work
Mm-hmm.
without like doing the supporting game design first. I think people often get that relationship like the wrong way around, where they
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I have to like implement these systems before I can do the game design. And like, I think that you should have like a very clear design in mind that you're trying to like force with the systems, rather than like, if I implement the features, the design will like come naturally.
Gotcha. Right.
Um,
Right. Think more about how a player will deal with it rather than the things I need to finish building. um, cool. Well, my dude, it has been a absolute pleasure chitter chatting. I mean, where shall people go to look for Dustbiters and Angerfoot and other things
uh,
Robbie
Dust
related?
Spiders, you can go to dustspiders.com. That will link you directly to the Kickstarter page. There's a couple weeks left to get your pre-orders in. Angerfoot, um, I don't know if you can like edit in a URL or something, but it's on itch.io. If you search like itch.io Angerfoot,
Mm-hmm.
or just Angerfoot game in Google, or probably just Angerfoot. I don't know what our SEO is like these
Right.
days, but I don't think there are that many things relating the concept of anger and feet, so it's visible.
Right. Cool. Well, I mean, dude, thank you so much for coming on. It's a lot of fun catching up, and everybody else, I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Probably. We'll do more game dev and other nonsense. for now.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure.
Yes. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye bye.